It's been 10 years since the original Bayonetta appeared on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. It's a great action game and still one of the best games today, and for its 10th anniversary, it has returned, this time on Xbox One and PlayStation 4. A homecoming of sorts, I suppose. And I'm here to discuss these ports today, to compare them against other versions of the game, check out performance, and see what sort of improvements you can expect. And to do that, I am joined by the one who covered that original 360 and PS3 version of the game, the one and only Richard Ledbetter.
You're giving me some sudden flashback issues here, John, because going back to those original last-gen versions of the game, well, what can you really say about that? We had the Xbox 360 version by Platinum Games itself, which was pretty awesome, and then we had the PlayStation 3 version, which wasn't.
Yeah, so that, this is kind of a notorious conversion, that PS3 version. It was farmed out, so to speak, and the quality was very low. The frame rate was terrible. It looked worse. There's loading everywhere. It was just a mess. Clearly, the 360 version was the one that Platinum poured all their time and effort into. So, in a way, like, having this reappear on a PlayStation platform is like a chance for redemption, if you will. This could be the first time we have a high quality conversion of Bayonetta, but it wasn't just an Xbox and PS3 game. This is the original Bayonetta has since appeared on the Wii U, if you remember that, the Switch, the PC, Xbox One backwards compatibility, and now this new version. And they're all interesting, I think.
Definitely, yeah. So, I don't know, do you want to recap what the other ones did or go straight into the current gen versions? But I do think there was quite an interesting story charting its development from what we saw back in the past to where we are today.
I agree. So, obviously, on 360, which was the base version, it was a 720p game. It had vertical sync disabled, or it was more like an adaptive VSync. So it targets 60 FPS, but when it can't hit that update, it drops VSync and you get tearing. So when they made the switch to Wii U, that was the first good port of the game, and that actually runs with VSync enabled. But it's the same 720p output. It looks basically the same as the 360, with just subtle differences to certain parts of the image quality, kind of just, Wii U versus 360, if you will. It does have slightly more input latency as a result of the enabling of VSync, I suppose. I think it's a triple buffer VSync setup.
Okay.
So there is that. But it's, it was a very solid version. And then I think the next one that appeared, if I'm wrong, it must have been the Xbox One backwards compatible version.
Yeah, quite possibly. And then, of course, that had an Xbox One X kind of boost to performance just through nature of the hardware there.
Yeah, exactly. It was not an Xbox One X enhanced version, so it does still run at 720p, but yeah, when you play it on X, you get improved texture filtering, and it basically solves all the performance problems for the most part. It's very, very smooth on the X. That's a great way to play it. And then it appeared again on the PC, which was an excellent port. You could run that thing on very low spec hardware. I think I tested it on a Radeon 7770 or whatever.
Yep, 1 gigabyte.
Yeah, it was a pretty simple GPU, and it ran alright, even at 4K. Not perfect, but you could get there.
I mean, that level of hardware would have been less capable than Xbox One, and you were getting a locked 1080p 60 on it. So
Exactly. So that says a lot right there. And then the last version was the Switch version, which I kind of thought was disappointing in that it was still 720p. It was basically the Wii U version again, but with a smoother frame rate. So it was a good version, but not exceptional. But now here we are, this new version. We've kept everybody waiting, so here's the score. So what do you want to know first, base consoles or pro consoles?
I think we should start with the base consoles. I mean, that's where most people have owned the machines, so this is where the game is most likely to be experienced, I guess. So let's start there.
Well, both PS4 and Xbox One are 1080p. So it's really that simple. They both hit 1080p, and honestly, that's kind of what I would have expected based on what we saw with the PC version.
Right.
Both GPUs should be more than capable of running this game at 60 FPS at 1080p, and that is indeed the case. So it
I
looks.
guess the question from there is, do you get anything extra over the original Xbox 360 version apart from...
Well, I think if you're playing on Xbox One, and I guess PS4 as well, versus 360 or Xbox One SBC, you get improved texture filtering. The performance is extremely stable. I mean, even on the base Xbox One, it's we'll talk more about that, but it's good. It runs well. But then there's the Pro consoles, and this is a little bit more surprising, I think, in that both X and Pro are 1440p.
Yeah, that's a bit of a disappointment, I think, especially for the Xbox One X users. I mean, we're kind of used to 1440p resolutions on PS4 Pro, on quite a few titles, but then again, not really on the retro ones. We kind of expect a bit more.
I kind of expected both to be either native 4K or closer to it. So 1440p is a strange stopping point, I think. I didn't expect that.
I mean, I've been looking back at your PC coverage, and we were talking about what it takes to get to 4K, and you could do it on a GTX 970, but you had to overclock it, and even then there were some performance drops by the looks of things. So I don't know, maybe the sort of requirements, bandwidth requirements in particular, when it's throwing all of those effects about, maybe it's just really demanding at higher resolutions. That's what the PC version kind of suggests, but at the same time, it doesn't really explain why two machines with very different technical specifications are handing in effectively identical experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're onto something there with the bandwidth issue due to the amount of alpha effects it throws around. My guess is that they simply wanted to aim for absolute consistency, if possible. So even though there isn't a difference, it's like, okay, they settled on this resolution, and it ensures plenty of headroom to avoid performance issues, is my guess. But it is still a little strange. I kind of was anticipating that Xbox One X would at least be something like, I don't know, 1600p or, a slight boost in pixel count. So, because this game uses an older style of anti-aliasing, it ends up looking not as clean as it could, right? So if they had implemented, say, TAA, it would have been soft but very clean. And that's not to say that it's not still clean enough, but it definitely doesn't feel quite as refined as you might expect. But that's really the only visual complaint I can level at this game, though. It looks great across all four platforms still. They all have a high level of texture filtering. All the details are there. There's no real reduction in visual quality. This is the only difference, though, that I noticed is that, and I think you said this makes sense. This probably has to do with the Rec 709 gamma curve that the Xbox platform likes to use. Microsoft loves this. There is a difference in overall brightness and exposure, I guess, between the PlayStation and Xbox versions.
Yeah.
So Xbox One is darker than PS4, and that is consistent with the 360 version.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense then.
Exactly. It's exactly the same as 360.
Yeah, it's still kind of a weird one, though. But are there no additional improvements at all? Because I'm looking back at your PC coverage here. We had ambient occlusion added on PC. We had a MSAA as an option. I'm going to assume MSAA is out of the window. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, MSAA does not appear to be active.
So there's no options at all like there were on PC or anything like that?
That's right. There's no real options to adjust here, and it is missing some of the PC settings, of course. So ambient occlusion is not featured here, though it's honestly so subtle to the point that it kind of doesn't matter. In addition, shadow resolution isn't as refined as the highest PC setting. So while it doesn't look quite as good as the PC version, of course, it's still the best looking console version by far.
Okay, well, I guess that's kind of good news. It's just, I think there's kind of like a lingering sense that we were kind of hoping for more from it.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Again, though, it's still good, I guess is the key. And it's nice to have this on a physical disc being released alongside Vanquish, which we'll also be covering. And, it's kind of, it's a really good version of the game overall in terms of visual quality. But I guess, we also need to talk about performance.
Well, I'm not expecting huge concerns if they're limiting resolution on the enhanced machines, put it that way, especially on Xbox One X. So what is the score there?
So like I said, just as a reminder, the 360 version here, you see, I use this opening battle a lot for testing because the more intense stuff way later in the game does take a very long time to get through across multiple platforms. And this opening scene is perhaps one of the most demanding scenes early on. And as you can see, there is a lot of tearing on the 360. It does not hold at 60. But many of the other battles do get closer, so it's not bad. Obviously, the PS3 version is terrible in comparison. Wii U was similar to 360, but without tearing, and it does get a bit chunky later in the game. Not exceptional, but still good enough. And then, Xbox backwards compatible, that was solid. Pretty darn good. Same with Switch. All of those were solid. Obviously, the PC version was variable depending on your hardware, but, as we said, like a GTX 970 with a few little issues here and there could still get close to 4K 60, which is great. So, by virtue of the lower resolution settings, I suppose, on this new version, we do have very nice performance. So, individually, there isn't much to say about each one. We played through the first several chapters, I suppose, and looking through my frame rate footage here, I'm just scanning over it, you can see that there just isn't anything to really complain about overall in terms of gameplay performance. Occasionally you might have 1 or 2 frames skipped here and there. I saw that on the Pro, only on the Pro actually, but it's literally just 1 frame, just a small hiccup, could be anything, an IO stutter, so it's hard to say.
Yep.
But
and it
really
would have been imperceptible to the human eye during gameplay, I'd guess.
Absolutely. It's not really something you're going to notice when it happens so infrequently. So in terms of pure gameplay performance, these are very, very good. All 4 versions. It runs really, really well. So, I mean, that's the most important part. But it's not flawless. And that, I mean, the cutscenes. So, as always, the cutscenes are capped at 30 frames per second. They use a lot of motion blur. They look great. They're very, very stylish, actually. But I noticed on the performance graph, you can see this here, there are frame pacing issues. It's not too severe, but you can see that it happens here. But the thing is, though, is that this only occurs on the PlayStation platforms. So switching over to the base PS4 here, you see exactly the same thing. Pretty much every cutscene has this issue, although it's not too severe, but it does kind of pop up and it spoils the fluidity just a bit. But if we jump over to the Xbox platforms, and this is true for both Xbox One X and S, the frame pacing issues are gone and the cutscenes play back at a perfect 30 FPS. So I don't really think it's a performance issue on PlayStation, but more something to do with the way that they're capping the frame rate at 30 for these sequences.
Well, improper frame pacing can be caused by the GPU being pushed to its limits, but I think we can safely suggest that's not happening here.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case here at all. It just sort of sputters along like this, so again, not really a huge deal or anything, but it is the one kind of difference I really noticed between the Xbox and PlayStation version, so it's something to keep in mind.
Well, look, if they're at double buffer VSync and they've got all of this GPU overhead, then there would have been no need for triple buffering, and presumably, I'm going to guess that the response is actually pretty good.
Yeah, that's quite right. It's always hard to get an exact number on this in this time frame, but yeah, it feels very, very responsive. The 360 version might technically still have the fastest response, as that it has the adaptive VSync enabled, but I think it does feel more responsive than, say, the Wii U version, which was triple buffered. So that's good.
Okay.
But, all versions I think are quite playable, except for that PS3 original.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm going to sort of round off with a question, and it does relate to the Xbox One X version of the game, 1440p. What if the Xbox One backcompat team had done an X-enhanced version of the game? We would have automatically, out of the box, got a 9 times resolution increase for native 4K, which we're not getting here, and that would have been done via an emulation layer. So obviously there'd have been the possibility that it wouldn't be as absolutely locked to 60 frames per second as this release is. But, if the backcompat team can do a 9 times increase in resolution via emulation, I'm still struggling to understand why we're only getting a 4 times increase on the X this time around. I have to admit, I'm a bit baffled by this one.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think really the only thing you would have lost is, so this uses native 4K output for things like fonts. Some of the fonts, at least, not everything, but certain UI elements and fonts have been updated to high res. They look very clean. But overall, yeah, you're right. The Xbox One, an X enhanced version, had it existed, has the potential to have looked better than this overall. So
yeah.
it is slightly baffling.
Well, it's a bit of a downer to end on, so let's talk quickly, maybe a touch about Vanquish, because we're going to be looking at that next. And in theory, this is a far more demanding port if they're targeting 60 frames per second on the enhanced machines, because, obviously last gen it was 30 frames per second, right?
Yeah, if that, it was often under 30 FPS. So it was a tough one. And we only have the only port we have of that is PC.
Right. Okay. And that was a bit more demanding than Bayonetta was, if memory
Absolutely.
serves.
So yeah, I've only had a chance to check out Vanquish on the Pro thus far, so we'll have to see how it stacks up. I can confirm that it targets 60 FPS as the base. We'll say it's not quite as flawless as this, but the things are looking very good overall. So when we get to that video, we'll be back to discuss this one together, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, this was another classic Platinum title from the last gen era. It really was.
And this one was kind of a redemption, as we'll discuss, where they put a lot of time and effort into ensuring that the PS3 version was actually great. And it was. So in that sense, PlayStation owners have always had a good version available to them. And now we have it again on consoles at targeting 60 FPS. So very curious to see how it pans out across all the different platforms.
Good stuff, but I guess that's it really, isn't it, for this one?
Yeah, I think that's going to have to do it for this one. There's not much more to say about Bayonetta other than it's still a great game. And, I'm happy to have a new physical release of it that's borderline. It's almost definitive. If only it was just a little bit more enhanced, I'd say that. But overall, it's still the best console version by far. Definitely worth checking out again. But yeah, so thanks for joining me on this one, Richard.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure.
And if you guys enjoyed this video, as always, be sure to like and subscribe, ring the notification bell for instant updates from Digital Foundry, and be sure to check out our Patreon for some crisp 4K action, because while this game is not native 4K, we do have a nice 4K version up on there, so it's worth checking out. And yeah, find us over on Twitter and all that stuff. And until next time, this is John and Rich signing off.